You know that phrase, "In God we trust"? It's literally everywhere on every dollar bill, every coin plastered on buildings.
Yeah.
Most of us probably don't even notice it anymore. But today, on the deep dive, we're going to peel back the layers.
Hmm.
We want to understand how those four words became the official motto of the United States and, well, why they still manage to stir up debate.
It's funny, isn't it? It's so common, so ingrained that its actual history often gets, completely missed.
Yeah.
People kind of assume it's always been there,
Yeah.
part of the furniture. But its journey is, well, pretty fascinating. It reflects some really big shifts in American identity.
Okay.
So, yeah, we'll uncover some surprising facts, different viewpoints, basically give you a shortcut to being really well informed on this little piece of Americana.
So the big questions are, where did it actually come from? What's it supposed to signify? And why is it still something people argue about today?
Exactly.
All right, let's dig in and unpack all of that for you. So to start, maybe we should go back in time a bit. Let's transport ourselves back to, say, the mid-19th century, the Civil War era, because that's when In God We Trust first pops up.
Yeah, and you absolutely have to understand the context. I mean, imagine the country literally ripping itself apart.
Yeah, intense.
Immense trauma. And right alongside that, maybe because of it, there was this huge surge in religious feeling across the country.
Oh.
A lot of Americans were just grappling with the horror, the loss,
Yeah.
and they turned to faith, for comfort, for strength, maybe seeing God's help as the only way through.
So it bubbles up from this national crisis moment. Was there, like, one specific thing, a trigger?
There really was. The specific catalyst seems to be a letter written in 1861 by a minister from Pennsylvania, Reverend Watkinson.
Okay.
He wrote to the Treasury Secretary, Salmon P. Chase, arguing pretty strongly that it was inappropriate, I think was his word, for a Christian nation not to mention God and its money, especially then.
And Chase, he was a big deal in Lincoln's cabinet, wasn't he? Was he open to it?
Oh, very much so. He actually wrote back to the director of the Mint, and this quote is pretty telling. He said, "No nation can be strong except in the strength of God, or safe except in his defense."
Wow.
Yeah, it really shows that belief that, national survival, national strength, it was tied to divine power. A powerful idea when the nation's falling apart.
That really paints a picture. So, okay, a minister writes a letter, the secretary agrees. How fast does it actually end up on the money?
Surprisingly quickly, actually.
Yeah.
It wasn't long after that, 1864. That's when In God We Trust first appeared on U.S. currency.
1864. On which coin?
It started small, on the 2-cent coin.
The 2-cent coin.
Yep. That humble little coin marks the very beginning of this whole story, its journey onto American money.
Okay, so it lands on the 2-cent piece during the Civil War, sort of like a little prayer etched in metal.
You could see it that way.
But it didn't immediately take over everything, right? It stayed kind of low-key for a while.
That's right. It was on some coins, but not all, and definitely not paper money yet.
So what was the big push? What catapulted it from being on a couple of coins to becoming the official national motto?
Right. That's the next big chapter. You have to fast forward quite a bit, actually, to the 1950s.
The 50s. Okay, different era entirely.
Totally different. And the crucial backdrop here is the Cold War.
Ah, okay. The U.S. versus the Soviet Union.
Exactly. This massive ideological battle. And a key difference the U.S. wanted to highlight was that the Soviet Union actively promoted state atheism, communism.
Right. So the U.S. needed a counter-narrative.
Precisely. The U.S. positioned itself in direct contrast as a nation of faith, rooted in moral values, maybe even divinely guided. It became this strong us versus them thing.
So putting In God We Trust front and center was part of that strategy, a way to draw a clear line.
Absolutely. A very deliberate cultural and political statement. Think about the pressure back then.
Yeah.
Questioning the motto. That could easily get you labeled as un-American, maybe even a communist sympathizer.
That really underscores the climate of the time. So this ideological positioning, it wasn't just talk. It led to actual laws.
It did. In 1956, Congress passed a law. That law officially declared In God We Trust as the national motto of the United States.
1956. And then onto paper money.
The very next year, 1957, that's when it started appearing on the dollar bills. And it wasn't just about money. It seeped into other areas, too. Schools, public life, shaping that idea of what American meant in the Cold War context.
You know, thinking about the motto, it replaced E pluribus unum.
Meaning out of many, one.
Right. Switching from out of many one to In God We Trust feels like a really significant shift. What does that swap tell us about how America saw itself then?
That is such a key point. E pluribus unum really speaks to unity coming from diversity, right? A
Mhm.
civic ideal.
Yep.
Switching to "In God We Trust," especially in that Cold War context, it emphasized a different kind of unity. One based on a shared religious belief, or at least the idea of a shared belief. It grounded American identity more explicitly in faith, directly countering the Soviet atheism. It was a pretty profound shift in emphasis.
Okay, so that brings us more towards the present day. Let's talk about what "In God We Trust" actually means now, because it seems simple, but you mentioned controversy.
Right. On the surface, for many people, it's just a straightforward expression of faith, trust in a higher power, part of the national identity, acknowledging maybe a kind of divine guidance in the nation's history.
But not everyone sees it that way.
Definitely not. Critics raise a really fundamental point. They argue having it on money, on government buildings, it blurs the line between church and state.
The Establishment Clause issue?
Exactly. The First Amendment says Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. Critics say this motto, endorsed by the government, does exactly that. It promotes a religious idea.
Have the courts weighed in on this? I imagine it's been challenged.
Oh, several times. But here's where it gets interesting legally. The courts have consistently upheld the motto.
How do they justify that?
Their reasoning generally is that the phrase has become more of a ceremonial deism, kind of a patriotic slogan rather than a specific religious endorsement. They see it as part of the historical fabric, like saying God saved the court, rather than the government actively pushing religion.
So more symbolic than substantive, in the court's view. Like an old tradition?
Sort of. It's like they're saying its original religious meaning has been diluted over time by its widespread patriotic use, which, raises its own questions about how we interpret these embedded phrases.
Okay, so that's the critical view and the legal response. What's the counter-argument from those who support it?
The alternative view often emphasizes America's history. They argue it reflects the nation's primarily Judeo-Christian roots.
A historical nod.
Yeah, acknowledging the values that many believe shape the country. It's seen less as imposing belief now and more as recognizing a historical influence, part of the national heritage.
So it really pulls in two directions.
It absolutely does. It could be seen as patriotic, spiritual, historical.
Mm-hmm.
It really depends on your perspective how you, the listener, interpret it, which makes it endlessly debatable, doesn't it?
It really does. And part of that might be just how present it is, its ubiquity. You said earlier, it's literally everywhere.
It really is.
Yeah.
Start looking for it. Obviously, every single U.S. coin and bill you touch.
You can't miss it there.
No. It's almost like white noise. We see it so often on money.
But it's way beyond just currency, right?
Oh, yeah. Public buildings, government offices often have it displayed. Some states offer it on license plates.
I've seen those.
Military memorials frequently feature it, even inside courtrooms sometimes. Once you start noticing, it's kind of surprising how pervasive it is.
And schools, too.
Yes, schools are a big one. Many states either encourage or even mandate that classrooms display "In God We Trust." So kids might say the pledge, under God, and then see this motto on the wall, too. It becomes part of the educational environment from a young age.
And it's not like this is fading away. Didn't Congress reaffirm it relatively recently?
It did, in 2006, actually.
Right.
On the 50th anniversary of it becoming the official motto, the Senate passed a resolution reaffirming it, sort of doubling down on its status.
So wrapping this up, whether you see it as, I don't know, a bold declaration of faith or maybe a calculated Cold War move or just a historical phrase, there's no denying those four words, "In God We Trust," carry a lot of weight, a lot of history.
They really do. The phrase tells such a rich story. It touches on war, the search for unity, changing values, evolving identity, all packed into four words.
Yeah.
It's a fascinating lens for looking at American history. And clearly, we're talking about it now, it still sparks conversation over 150 years after it first appeared.
So what's the takeaway for you listening right now? I guess it's that even something as familiar as a phrase on your money can hold, centuries of change and layers of meaning. It invites us to look a bit closer at things we take for granted.
Absolutely. And maybe a final thought to leave you with. Think about how this motto, which came out at very specific times, the Civil War, the Cold War, how does it reflect and maybe even shape the conversations we're still having today about faith, government, and what it means to be American in such a diverse country, and maybe what other common symbols or phrases are out there hiding their own deep histories in plain sight.